Okay, so this is going to be something new so that you can see me at the same time that I'm talking, because a lot of my, I guess, explanation for muscle also involves you being able to see what I'm doing with my hands. All right, so we talked about epithelial tissue. We kind of did the intro to the four tissues to begin with, but now we're going to talk about the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue has one job and one job only. It contracts, it moves. You've got these fibers inside oy, that literally crawl on each other. And as they do, the muscle shortens. When they let go, the muscle lengthens, so it relaxes. But this ability to do this crawling and causing the muscle to shorten and lengthen is actually really specific to muscle tissue. As a matter of fact, muscle tissue is the only tissue that moves in your body, like I mentioned before. So we've got three types of muscle tissue. We have skeletal muscle, which is attached to your skeleton. We have cardiac muscle, which is only found in one place in your body, and that's the heart. And then we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the family and can be found pretty much anywhere. Throw a dart and you'd find smooth muscle. So let's talk about the first two. You've got skeletal muscle. I forgot to turn the ringer off on my phone. Hang on a second. Okay, so you've got skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle that look very, very similar. They look almost exactly alike when you look at them. So you need to look for landmarks. One of the things with skeletal muscle that you have to remember is it's attached to your skeleton for a reason. So when you've got, let's say, a skeletal muscle, let's say your bicep, okay? It has to go across a joint in order to actually pull and make this bend. That means that those cells have to be extremely long, especially for something that is microscopic in structure. So when you're developing in the womb, one of the things that happens is you've got individual cells that are actually becoming one long fiber of a cell. That's muscle fibers. That's why we call the muscle cells, the skeletal muscle cells, muscle fibers, because they look like strings. Anybody who's ever had a chicken breast, you pull on the chicken and you get kind of stringies, that's actually the skeletal muscle cells. So that is one big kind of landmark when you're looking at the slides, that you're looking at something that is a skeletal muscle versus a cardiac muscle. Now, I'm going to move this, okay, so that I can draw on the slide and show you some things. So you're going to be looking at the ceiling while I do that. Just FYI. All right. So with skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle, when you look, you'll notice that they kind of all have these little stripies. You can see that you've got the same kind of little stripy look to them on the actual muscle themselves. But you'll also notice that these are very, very long. Okay? They're the fibers that we were talking about earlier. Something else that has to happen as well. Remember what I said about them contracting. You've got these little guys that are crawling and letting go and crawling and letting go, right? Well, nuclei, if I'm fusing all of these cells together, all of those nuclei are going to be part of that. If I have a big, huge nuclei in the middle of it, it means that I can't get down under here to get to what I need to grab so that I can pull to make my muscle contract. So what does that mean? It means that all of the nuclei have to kind of be pushed out of the way. You have to get them out of the way so that all of these fibers that are crawling like this have the ability to grab hold here and cause the contraction. So again, if you look at the skeletal muscle slide, you'll notice that I do have nuclei, but they kind of look like dashes because I've pushed them all out of the way so that those little contracting fibers don't have anything blocking them from getting access to the active sites that they bind to cause contraction. So that's one. That's skeletal muscle. You've got these long fibers. You do have the stripes like that, which are called striations. But one of the biggest landmarks you have is the fact that the nuclei are all kind of pushed to the side and out of the way. Cardiac muscle does look very, very similar. It's got the striations as well. It's got the little stripies as well. But if you look really close, you'll notice that some of these stripies are very dark in comparison to the other little light banding. That is one of the landmarks of cardiac muscle. As well, notice that the nuclei are big and round and kind of in the middle of everybody's business, right? They're not put out to the side like dashes like you see in the skeletal muscle. These are huge landmarks that you have to understand exist because cardiac muscle is different. Its job is slightly different. So make a fist. However big your fist is about the size of your heart. So my heart is about this big. And I know with the camera and distance and everything, it looks really huge, but it sits about right here in my chest. There is no huge long distance that this has to cover to go over a joint to cause bending. So I can actually have individual cells here. It still does use the same method of grabbing and moving along a surface to cause the contraction, to cause the muscle to shorten. But since I've got individual cells, I don't have to have all of the nuclei pushed out of the way because I'm not fusing these cells as they're developing. These two are the most confusing because when you look at smooth muscle looks nothing like the other two. Smooth muscle is basically the redheaded stepchild that doesn't match anybody else in the family. Smooth muscle doesn't contract in the same way. So with skeletal muscle and with cardiac muscle, you actually have kind of a contraction happening from inside the cell. So inside the cell, those little crawly things are basically pulling the sides in from the inside. With smooth muscle, though, you actually have something that kind of looks like fishnet stockings that surround that cell. And the crawly fibers I've been talking about are actually more on the fishnet stockings. And it would be equivalent to having a boiled egg in fishnet stockings and the fishnet stockings getting tighter and tighter and kind of squishing the egg in between. So with smooth muscle, the contraction is happening from the outside and not from the inside. That's why you don't see the little stripies that you see in skeletal muscle and in cardiac muscle that you see in you don't see those that you see in the others in smooth muscle. There we go. That's what I meant to say. So let's now look at each individually and look for our landmarks and the things that we need to be able to label. You get to look at the ceiling while we do this. So skeletal muscle. Where do you find it? Well, you find it attached to the skeleton. That's why it's called skeletal muscle. And if you really want to, if that question comes up and you want to put a bicep, a tricep, the gluteus maximus, the gluteus minimus, that's fine. You can do that. I have no issue with that. What type of tissue is this? Again, remember that there are only 4. So if I ask you what type of tissue this is muscle tissue. Okay? If I ask you to identify the slide, well, this specifically is skeletal muscle. That's the slide that you're looking at. So let's look at the things that you have to be able to identify on the slide. So First thing to notice, look at the nuclei. They're all dashes. They all look like they're pushed to the side. That automatically means skeletal muscle. Look at the cells. They're these long strips or fibers. Okay? And I've got these little stripy things here, all indicating that I'm looking at skeletal muscle. So when it comes to your practical, I can ask you to identify these. These little black dashes are going to be the nuclei. I can ask you to identify the striations, the stripes that you see here. And I can ask you to identify the muscle fiber. So the muscle fiber itself is what we consider a cell inside of skeletal muscle. Even though in the womb we had multiple cells that all fused together, ultimately this one fiber works as a single unit. So since it works as a single unit, we consider it a single cell. In the case of skeletal muscle, the cell's name is muscle fiber. Cardiac muscle. So with cardiac muscle, we also have nuclei. These things here, that's an awful color, hang on. These things here are the nuclei. You can see that they're stained more darkly. Okay, you'll also notice that they are not in dashes along the side in multiples. You can also see the striations, that kind of striping pattern that we saw before in skeletal muscle. That hasn't changed. But you also see these guys, these stripes here, that are actually darker than the other stripes that you've seen. These are called intercalated discs. So, getting back to looking at me again. Your heart has to contract in a really specific pattern. It's kind of like saying I have to go step 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. And if you don't do that, the heart doesn't work the right way. In order for it to fill certain chambers and empty other chambers in the right sequence, it has to contract in sequence. It has to contract in pattern. These intercalated discs are actually communication between neighboring cells, allowing that step-by-step process to literally travel from cell to cell to cell in sequence so that when your heart beats, it beats correctly. If you've ever seen anybody, a medical movie or a medical show where they talk about somebody being in AFib or VFib, or they talk about them not showing a proper rhythm, that basically means that instead of the heart going contract, 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 it's doing this business and it's kind of twitching in different places. When your heart does that, nothing is moving because, again, everything has to happen in sequence. So when they shock the heart, when it's doing this business, this twitchy business, basically what they're doing is they're going, oh, okay, let me start over. And hopefully, if you're really, really lucky, it starts to beat normally again. But these intercalated discs, the intercalated discs that you see, those dark bands, are actually the connections between neighboring cells, so that, like a domino hitting its neighbor, that signal goes from the first set of cells to the second set of cells to the third set of cells. All right, so again, fair game questions. What type of tissue is this? It's muscular tissue. Let's see. Identify the slide. Slide. Well, this is cardiac muscle. Where would you find it? There's only one place to find cardiac muscle in the whole body. The heart. That's why it's called cardiac muscle. And then identify. A, B, and C. With this one slide, I'm able to ask you at least 6 questions, okay? Just so you understand. Smooth muscle. Okay, what type of tissue is it? It's muscle tissue, right? Because it's in this category. Identify the slide. Well, this is smooth muscle. Where would you find it? Well, like I said, throw a dart and you'll find smooth muscle. It's actually in your skin, it's in your eye, it's in your stomach, it's in your intestines. The thing that makes your food move from your mouth into your stomach, and then your stomach move to mix, and then your intestines move your food through so that we can absorb nutrients and get rid of waste. All of that is smooth muscle. Okay? Now, this is actually smooth muscle that's kind of been picked apart. It's kind of been torn apart a bit so that you can actually see the individual cells. So you can see the nuclei. These dark purple spots are still nuclei. When you stain tissues, that's usually what they end up looking like. And then the muscle cells are the pink parts. So that pink part that you see is actually an individual cell.